Welcome to another AI pattern recognition deep dive.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
You know, we talk about artificial intelligence almost every day, it seems.
Yep.
But usually the AIs we discuss, they're kind of like historians, aren't they?
That's a great way to put it, yeah. They're master statisticians, absolutely. They predict tomorrow based, well, entirely on patterns they discovered in everything that happened yesterday.
So they're always looking backward.
Exactly. They're essentially navigating the future by constantly looking through a very refined, very powerful rearview mirror. They're incredible at finding patterns. I mean, truly amazing. But those patterns are always artifacts of the past.
Right. But today, we are jumping into something, well, entirely different. It feels like a fundamental shift. It's being called Without Historical Data AI, or WHDAI for short.
WHDAI, yeah.
And our deep dive today, it's all focused on sources detailing this new kind of AI, one that promises to maybe finally break that cycle of the past by basically ignoring history's correlations and focusing entirely on real-time causal understanding. Is that about right?
That's absolutely right. And the mission here for you, the learner, is really understanding why this isn't just a minor tweak. You know, it's not just a technical upgrade for the AI we already have.
Okay.
This is about switching the fundamental cognitive architecture, moving from like statistical correlation, what things tend to happen together, to first principles causation, why things
Yeah, they happen. Okay.
And that shift, that focus on why, allows us to proactively seek solutions for problems that traditional AI, which is inherently history-bound, it literally cannot touch. It's not equipped for it.
Problems like what, specifically? Give us the big picture.
Well, think about truly novel situations. Global pandemics where there's just no precedent, nothing in the history books quite matches, or systemic inequalities baked so deep into human history, the historical data is the problem.
Right, the data reflects the inequality.
Precisely. Or climate tipping points, these moments where the climate system behaves in ways that defy those smooth, linear historical models. Traditional AI struggles there.
Okay, so before we dive into the solution, this WHDAI, let's really nail down the problem. You mentioned traditional AI is history-bound.
Yeah.
What are the, say, 3 critical limitations that really hamstring it?
Yeah, they all really stem from that core dependence on aggregated historical data. The first one is probably the most widely discussed. The historical bias problem.
Okay, bias. We hear that a lot.
We do. Because human history, I mean, let's face it, the very data set we use to train these systems, it's imperfect.
Yes.
It's riddled with centuries of structural bias, real inequality, outdated, sometimes harmful social norms.
So the AI trains on that.
Exactly. When an AI trains on that data, it doesn't question the source. It doesn't have, you know, an ethical filter baked in from the start. It just optimizes the pattern it sees.
Can you give an example? Like with loans, maybe?
Sure. So if historically 90% of loan applications were approved for one demographic and only 10% for another, maybe due to past discriminatory practices, conscious or unconscious, the AI doesn't see historical injustice. It doesn't recognize the why behind that pattern. It just sees an optimal statistical pattern that says approving 90% for Group A and 10% for Group B leads to the historically observed outcomes. So it concludes that's the most efficient way to operate based on the data it learned from.
Wow, so it doesn't just learn the bias, it actually becomes a tool to make perpetuating that bias super efficient.
Precisely. It maximizes fidelity to the training data, not fidelity to ethical progress or equality or fairness. This reinforcement of old, often toxic patterns is just an inherent flaw in any predictive model based purely on induction from imperfect history.
Okay, that makes sense. And that leads directly to the second issue you mentioned, right? The novel situation gap.
Exactly. Because if history is literally all, what happens when something truly, genuinely unprecedented occurs? Something with no historical parallel.
Yeah, what does happen?
Traditional AI fails, sometimes spectacularly. I'm faced with genuine discontinuities, a moment where the context has completely changed. The old rules just don't apply anymore.
Like the pandemic example.
Exactly. When a novel pathogen emerges that shares no significant genetic similarity with past outbreaks, the historical data set, all those records of previous flu seasons or epidemics, becomes almost useless for predicting its specific behavior or finding treatments.
For the climate example.
Right. Or when a climate feedback loop, maybe methane release from thawing permafrost, is triggered for the first time in recorded human history at this scale. The historical climate data just doesn't contain that dynamic.
So the AI is just lost.
All it can really do is attempt to find the closest fit in its historical database, which, in a truly novel situation, is often a dangerously inadequate, maybe even misleading response.
It's like trying to predict, I don't know, the path of a brand new asteroid that just showed up using only data from planets we already know. The rules might be totally different.
That's a good analogy. Your historical models, your understanding based on past observations, simply won't apply accurately. And this limitation, this inability to handle the truly new, leads directly to the third limitation, which our sources highlight as speaking to a larger, almost philosophical human tragedy: the destruction-rebuilding paradox.
Okay, paradox. Explain that one.
Well, the sources point out that if you look at human history on a long enough timescale, you see this cyclical pattern. We build civilizations, they flourish for a while, then eventually they decay and are often destroyed.
Destroyed how?
Often by internal conflict, maybe environmental collapse due to resource mismanagement or just running out of essential resources. And then eventually the cycle restarts, rebuilding happens.
So I see the cycle. Build, flourish, decay, destroy, rebuild.
Exactly. So if traditional AI learns this broad historical pattern, what does it predict? It recognizes the signs of decay, the precursors to collapse, but only after the initial stages of destruction are well underway and visible in the data.
So it can only identify the destructive pattern once it's already becoming a historical fact. It sees the smoke, but only after the fire has really started.
Precisely. It identifies destructive patterns after they become historical data points. The pattern of human self-destruction, things like war, pollution, societal breakdown, it's deeply embedded in the historical data that trains the AI. So traditional AI, just seeking to predict based on history, merely anticipates the historical decay pattern repeating.
But WHDAI, the goal is different.
The goal is to break that cycle, to recognize those destructive patterns as they emerge in real time using causal understanding before they gain that critical momentum and become just another inevitable data point for future historians or future AIs.
Okay, that sets the stage perfectly. This WHDAI revolution, it's not just about getting faster results from the same old methods. It sounds like a complete cognitive reset for AI.
It really is.
Moving away from prediction based on statistical tea leaves from the past and towards prediction based on fundamental universal truths about how things actually work.
That's the absolute essence of the paradigm shift. And we can define WHDAI by 4 core interconnected actions. It fundamentally moves away from just empirical observation, just watching what happens as its sole source of truth.
All right, let's break them down. What's the first core action that defines this new intelligence?
Okay, first, it recognizes patterns from first principles. This is huge. It means its foundational understanding isn't learned primarily from messy, biased historical training data.
So where does it come from?
It's deduced from the fundamental laws of physics, chemistry, biology, even logic and mathematics. These are the sort of axiomatic truths of how the universe operates.
Wow, okay. So it starts with the rule book of reality itself.
Exactly. And since reality doesn't conveniently stop evolving while we wait for, an annual database update,
Right.
the second action must be absolutely key here.
Which is,
It adapts in real time. It has to. It adapts to unprecedented situations as they unfold. It's not looking at a static snapshot of the past. It's designed to live in the moment, continuously recalibrating its internal models based on the constant flow of new information coming in from the environment.
okay, first principles, real-time adaptation. The third point you said links back to that central contrast, causation versus correlation.
Indeed. The third core action is that it operates on a deep causal understanding. Traditional AI is brilliant at telling you what two things tend to happen together. That's correlation. If A goes up, B often goes up.
Okay.
WHDAI aims to tell you why they happen together. That's causation. A causes B because of mechanism C. Knowing the mechanism, the why, is what allows for targeted, effective intervention, not just reacting to symptoms.
Right, you can actually fix the root cause.
That's the goal.
So we have first principles, real-time adaptation, and causal understanding. What's the fourth critical function? The one that makes sure it can handle the completely unknown.
The fourth function ensures it doesn't just freeze when faced with something totally novel. It responds to emergent phenomena without prior examples, because its models are built on those foundational laws, not just historical examples. It can simulate novel situations, it can predict potential outcomes purely through deduction using those fundamental rules, without needing to find a similar event in some history book or database.
Okay, this sounds less like computation and more like, well, a form of digital reasoning. Or even intuition, maybe. Not just memorizing facts, but truly understanding the underlying mechanics of the universe.
That's a good way to think about the ambition, yes. It's about generating understanding, not just performing classification based on past data.
So let's get deep into the engine room now.
Hmm.
How does it actually do this? How does it encode fundamental truth and manage that real-time flow of information? What are the core mechanisms driving it?
Right. This is where the rubber meets the road, technologically speaking. The sources outlined 5 critical mechanisms that allow WHDAI to generate this deeper understanding. The first one underpins everything. First principles reasoning.
And this means, like we said, loading it up not with data points from the past, but with the actual laws of nature.
Precisely. We are essentially encoding the universal constants and fundamental laws, the laws of thermodynamics, the principles of fluid dynamics, core concepts from game theory, foundational mathematics, and crucially, fundamental biological processes like how cellular metabolism works or how DNA replication functions. These laws are its starting axioms, its foundational knowledge base.
Okay, give me a really clear example. How is that different from traditional AI? Let's say I want to predict the flow of traffic at a brand new, really complex highway interchange that just opened. No history exists for it yet.
Great example. A traditional AI would use statistical induction. It would need to collect, say, thousands of hours of video footage after the interchange opens. It observes that when car A slows down near point X, 80% of the time, car B behind it also slows down. It builds a predictive model based purely on those observed correlations.
Okay, learning by watching.
Right. A WHDAI, using first principles, doesn't need to wait for that historical data. It understands the laws of kinetic energy, friction, average human reaction times based on biology, and maybe even optimal flow dynamics from network theory. It predicts the traffic flow based on the physics and the known psychology of drivers in that specific geometric configuration.
So even if that exact traffic pattern has never existed before.
It doesn't matter. The laws governing speed, mass, acceleration, and how humans react under certain conditions still apply. The WHDAI can deduce that a bottleneck will occur at a certain point because the geometry of the interchange violates the physical principles of smooth traffic flow, not just because it saw jams happening there historically.
That feels like a fundamentally deeper level of insight. Because like you said, it allows for intervention at the root cause, maybe redesigning that part of the interchange, rather than just reacting to the symptom, the traffic jam itself.
Exactly. That's the power of causal understanding, which leads nicely to the second mechanism, real-time sensor integration.
Okay, what does that involve?
Traditional AI often analyzes static data sets. A database dump from last quarter, last month's sales figures, a batch of images. WHDAI is designed to continuously and simultaneously integrate data from multiple diverse domains as it happens.
What kind of domains are we talking about?
We're talking biological feedback from wearables, real-time financial transactions, atmospheric readings from weather sensors, social communication patterns from public networks, logistical data, all ingested and processed together in the moment.
Why is that simultaneous cross-domain integration so crucial? Why not just analyze them separately?
Because reality isn't siloed. This integration allows the AI to recognize hidden patterns that cross traditional disciplinary boundaries, revealing previously invisible causal links.
Like what? Give me an example.
Okay, imagine this. WHDAI might recognize that a subtle regional fluctuation in ambient air temperature, that's atmospheric data, slightly affects the viscosity of commercial lubricants used in trucking fleets, that's fluid dynamics, physics. This tiny change slightly increases friction in the logistics networks, economic and operational data.
Still following.
Which leads to microscopically delayed shipments across a wide area, resulting in a measurable microspike in consumer anxiety reflected in online sentiment. That's social and psychological data.
Wow.
No historical AI, looking at weather data separately from logistics data, separately from social media sentiment, could easily connect those dots. They operate in separate departmental data sets, often analyzed weeks apart. WHDAI, integrating in real time, connects the macro, the weather, directly to the micro, the individual psychological response almost instantly.
Okay, that's a powerful input stream. So if it's getting all this real-time cross-domain data, the third mechanism must be about how it handles the lack of historical context for interpreting that data, especially for new patterns.
Correct. The third mechanism is absolutely vital. Counterfactual simulation. Since it can't always rely on history to understand the implications of a novel situation unfolding in real time,
Right.
It proactively generates novel situations itself internally. It constantly asks, what if? It tests hypotheses about potential futures through rapid, complex mental simulation based on its understanding of causal laws.
How is this different from, say, a standard computer simulation that scientists run today, like a climate model?
That's a good question. Traditional simulations often rely heavily on observed historical data to set the parameters and define the probabilities within the model. WHDAI uses its deep causal understanding, its first principles, to construct and explore scenarios that may have genuinely never happened before in recorded history.
It's not just modeling variations on the past, it's exploring truly new possibilities.
Exactly. It's essentially pre-living 1,000 potential futures based on the current state and potential interventions. This allows it to learn the likely causal impacts of different choices or events before they are applied or occur in reality. If you propose changing a specific variable in the system, say a new policy intervention, the AI can deduce the likely downstream consequences based on its causal model without waiting for a real-world, potentially costly empirical test.
It's like practicing for unprecedented situations without needing the unprecedented situation to actually happen first. That's incredibly powerful.
It is. It allows for proactive adaptation rather than reactive response.
But what happens when reality inevitably throws something at it that even its clever simulations didn't fully anticipate? Something truly out of the blue.
That brings us neatly to the fourth key mechanism, anomaly detection as learning. This is a fundamental shift in perspective. Traditional AI often views novel patterns data points that defy its established historical categories as errors.
There's noise.
Exactly. Noise or outliers to be discarded, perhaps smoothed over, for the sake of maintaining the predictive accuracy of its existing model, which was trained on the past.
Why does traditional AI want to discard anomalies? Seems counterintuitive.
It's typically built for efficiency and accuracy based on its training set. An anomaly, by definition, doesn't fit the established patterns, so it degrades the model's overall predictive performance on the data it knows. If a self-driving car sees a bizarre, unique combination of lighting, shadows, and roadside debris it's never encountered.
Yeah.
Its traditional AI might flag it as a sensor error or default to a known, potentially inappropriate behavior because the situation doesn't fit its learned categories. WHDAI, however, is designed to treat those anomalies as critical learning opportunities.
How so?
When WHDAI encounters a pattern that doesn't fit its existing causal models or categories, it doesn't just flag it as an error. It immediately begins trying to build a new ontology, a new classification system, a new understanding to accommodate this emergent phenomenon. It actively evolves its understanding of reality based on novelty.
So it doesn't try to force the new weird round peg into the old square hole of its historical knowledge.
Exactly. It builds a new round hole. Or perhaps it discovers that the peg isn't round or square, but some entirely new shape altogether, requiring a whole new category of understanding. It actively builds new knowledge structures when the old ones fail to explain the present reality.
Okay, that makes sense. Active learning from novelty. And the fifth mechanism, you mentioned hierarchy.
Yes, finally, the fifth mechanism is hierarchical pattern recognition. This is the system that helps manage the sheer complexity introduced by that real-time sensor integration we talked about.
How does it manage the complexity?
It allows the AI to recognize patterns operating across massively different scales, from the biochemical processes within an individual human cell up to the level of a community, a society, or even the global biosphere. And crucially, it understands how patterns at one level can feed back and causally affect patterns at other levels.
That micro and macro integration sounds vital. Can you give us another concrete example of that, how it connects different scales?
Sure. Let's reconsider a global economic crisis. Traditional economic models primarily analyze macro-level factors: national inflation rates, unemployment statistics, central bank interest rates, things like that.
Standard economics, yeah.
WHDAI tracks all of those, of course. But it also integrates micro-level patterns simultaneously. It might notice, for instance, a growing global pattern of individual cognitive overload and chronic stress, maybe detected through aggregate data from personal health trackers. That's an individual level pattern.
Okay, stress is rising.
It then connects this rising individual stress causally to, perhaps, a documented pattern of decreased long-term foresight and increased risk aversion in corporate boardroom decisions. That's an organizational level pattern derived from analyzing corporate reports or communication.
Stressed individuals make cautious companies.
Potentially, yes. And then it links that shift in corporate strategy to resulting volatility and unpredictability in the global financial markets. That's a societal or global level pattern. It understands that the individual inability to focus or think long-term when aggregated is causally linked to the chaotic volatility of the macroeconomy.
So the intervention, it suggests, might not just be about monetary policy.
Exactly. It might suggest that a successful intervention must also address the underlying collective psychological strain, maybe through public health initiatives aimed at reducing cognitive load or promoting mental well-being, because it sees that causal link across scales.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
The power of this real-time, personalized causal understanding. It becomes incredibly clear when we look at how it could impact individual human experience.
Absolutely.
We've all lived with traditional AI personalization for years, right? The algorithms telling you what product to buy or what movie to watch, always based on an aggregate of thousands, maybe millions of users who seem like you based on past behavior.
It's personalization based on statistical averaging.
But WHDAI personalization, based on what you're describing, feels like it's on an entirely different level. It's moving from that statistical average to your unique dynamic reality.
That's the core shift. The personalization changes from you fit into this box with these other people to you are a unique, complex, dynamic system, and this is exactly how your specific system is operating right now.
Okay, let's start with something deeply personal, transforming human relationships. Traditional advice, the kind you get from, I don't know, a relationship app or a self-help book, it's usually pretty generic, isn't it?
It often is. It's based on historical patterns, based on studies of 10,000 past relationships. When partner A does X, partner B typically responds with Y. It's statistical, often delivered too late after the argument has already happened, and it rarely feels truly empathetic to the specific nuances of this couple in this moment.
So how does WHDI change that? It ditches the historical template.
Completely. Instead, it engages in real-time, objective observation of the couple's interaction dynamics. It's designed to monitor subtle physiological markers in both individuals simultaneously.
Like what kind of markers?
We're talking minute shifts in body language captured by sensors, subtle changes in vocal patterns, pitch, tone frequency, speaking rate that often reveals subconscious stress or emotional shifts, maybe even changes in aggregate body heat signatures, micro-expressions flickering across the face, and potentially even stress hormones like cortisol measured via unobtrusive, perhaps wearable, biosensors.
Okay, so the application here isn't just about general conflict resolution advice. It's about detecting those subtle communication breakdown patterns that are unique to that specific couple's causal dynamic. How might that actually play out in, say, a typical domestic setting?
Right. Imagine partner A starts to speak very quickly, maybe raising their voice slightly when discussing finances. This action in real time triggers a measurable microspike in partner B's cortisol levels and maybe a slight increase in skin conductance physiological stress responses that the WHDAI system monitors.
Okay, partner B is getting stressed by the way partner A is talking.
Exactly. Now, a traditional system might only register this if it leads to a full-blown argument later, and then might offer a generic apology template or suggest active listening. The WHDAI, however, recognizes immediately that this specific quick speech pattern from partner A causally triggers a stress response in partner B. Perhaps because in their unique shared history, that particular speed and topic combinations signals a hidden, urgent problem is about to be revealed.
Ah, so it knows the specific trigger for that person.
Precisely, and based on that real-time causal link, it can suggest highly personalized de-escalation strategies tailored specifically to partner B's current emotional state as measured physiologically.
Like what?
It might subtly prompt partner A, maybe through a private notification on their device, to consciously slow their speech rate or adjust their vocal tone frequency to a range previously correlated with calm in partner B, or even suggest prefacing the financial topic with a specific phrase that, based on their history, is known to reduce partner B's anxiety about that subject.
That is radically different. It's not just advice, it's like personalized behavioral coaching based on objective biological feedback happening in the moment.
It is. And this brings us back to that fascinating concept mentioned in the sources, the empathy bridge device.
Right. Tell us more about that. How would that work?
The idea is if one partner is experiencing a strong physiological state, say high anxiety or maybe cognitive shutdown, the device doesn't just report the state. It attempts to translate that physiological state into terms the other partner can actually understand and act upon effectively.
It's not translating words?
No, it's translating internal states. So if partner B is shutting down due to cognitive overload, maybe their neural feedback shows decreased executive function activity, the device might communicate to partner A something like, partner B is currently experiencing an estimated 75% reduction in prefrontal cortex processing capacity. Their immediate need is likely 15 minutes of quiet connection and perhaps physical reassurance, not complex verbal problem solving right now.
Wow. It bridges that gap, that misalignment that happens when two people, two different internal operating systems, are trying to communicate under stress.
That's the concept. Moving communication beyond guesswork and assumptions into objective, shared understanding of internal states.
Okay, let's shift from relationships to learning. This feels equally revolutionary. As a learner myself, I'm really curious. How does WHDAI avoid that incredibly frustrating historical bias that effectively says, well, students from your background or students who struggled with topic X before typically struggle with geometry, so you should probably just prepare for failure?
Right. That historical advice assumes your past performance, or worse, your demographic group, dictates your future capacity. It's incredibly limiting. WHDAI fundamentally rejects that premise. It focuses entirely on your current cognitive state and capacity at the moment of learning.
How does it measure that?
It aims to restructure the educational environment by monitoring your real-time cognitive engagement using potentially quite advanced tools integrated into the learning platform. This could include things like eye tracking to see precisely where your visual attention is focused on the material, or maybe even where it's wandering off.
Okay, seeing where I'm looking.
It could also involve neural feedback, perhaps from a simple headband assessing things like beta and theta brainwave activity, which can indicate levels of focus, relaxation, or cognitive strain. And even analyzing microexpressions via webcam to gauge subtle signs of frustration, confusion, or hopefully engagement and insight.
So it's like watching my brain and face actively to see if I'm genuinely grasping a concept or if I'm just sort of passively moving my eyes over the text and maybe superficially memorizing a term without real understanding.
Exactly. It monitors your concept comprehension across different modalities. It learns if you personally learn better visually or auditorily or kinesthetically. If you're primarily a visual learner, presenting you with a long, purely auditory explanation will likely increase your cognitive load, and the AI is designed to see that dip in engagement or spike in frustration markers instantly, in real time.
And it tracks emotional state, too.
Yeah.
Motivation.
Yes, because those are critical for learning. It tracks your emotional state and motivation fluctuations, maybe through sentiment analysis of your typed inputs or those microexpressions. The real innovation here is that it recognizes your unique cognitive processing pattern today, not yesterday, not based on averages, but how your brain is responding to different explanation styles and levels of complexity right now. And it adjusts the teaching based on those emerging causal links that it observes.
So let's say it sees my beta waves dropping, indicating less focus, and my microexpressions are maybe tightening, indicating frustration with a complex math problem.
Yeah.
How does the adaptive curriculum you mentioned respond in that moment?
It doesn't wait for you to fail the quiz at the end of the chapter. It instantly tries to identify the likely cause of that engagement drop. Perhaps the complexity of the material jumped too quickly for your current state, or maybe the current teaching methods say, abstract text is overloading your visual processing capacity right now.
Okay.
The engine might then immediately shift the lesson format. It could switch from that abstract text to an interactive kinesthetic simulation of the math concept. Or it might recognize you're hitting cognitive fatigue limits and introduce a short, tailored break, perhaps suggesting a specific activity known to restore focus for your cognitive profile based on your monitored exhaustion level.
And what about those emotional learning companions?
They are conceptualized as AI agents designed specifically to use this real-time emotional and cognitive data to intervene more proactively. They might offer personalized motivational prompts when frustration is detected, or suggest alternative learning strategies, or even reframe the problem in a way that reduces anxiety. The goal is always to keep the learning process challenging enough to be engaging, but never so overwhelming that you reach the point of giving up. It's dynamic, personalized scaffolding.
Okay, let's turn this lens onto health and biology. This feels like arguably the most critical domain for WHDAI, especially for avoiding that novel situation gap when, say, a new biological threat emerges.
Absolutely. This is where relying on historical data can be most dangerous. When a truly novel pathogen emerges, one with zero historical data to reference, maybe with completely new mechanisms of action,
Yeah.
traditional medicine and public health scramble. They try desperately to find the closest match in history. Is it like SARS? Is it like the 1918 flu? To try and guess how it might behave and what treatments might work.
WHDAI skips that whole step.
It aims to skip that reliance on historical analogy entirely. Because it's built on first principles of biochemistry, virology, immunology, and cellular dynamics, it doesn't primarily need historical comparisons. Its approach would involve continuous health monitoring devices, maybe deployed rapidly in an outbreak, tracking hundreds of biomarkers in infected individuals in real time.
What kind of biomarkers?
Things like the kinetics of the immune response, how quickly are specific antibodies produced, how are T cells behaving, cellular behavior under the stress of infection, specific protein interaction pathways being activated or blocked by the pathogen. By monitoring these fundamental biological processes, it identifies the causal mechanisms of how this specific disease is progressing in this biological context in real time.
So it understands how this novel virus interacts with this human host's unique biology based on the universal laws of biochemistry, not based on the statistical average of how a somewhat similar virus behaved in a different population 50 years ago.
Exactly. It can then deduce the most effective intervention points based on disrupting the actual causal chain of the disease as it's happening. This might lead to identifying potential treatments, maybe repurposing existing drugs that target the specific pathway the virus is exploiting, even if that intervention has never been tried for a similar syndrome before.
It doesn't need the historical precedent for the disease, only for the mechanism.
Precisely. It doesn't need historical data to know that blocking a specific metabolic pathway, if the virus relies on it, will inhibit the pathogen's replication. It deduces that from the fundamental rules governing the cell and the observed real-time interactions.
Okay, and what about personalized medicine, moving past that incredibly frustrating statistical outcome? This drug works great, but only for 60% of patients like you.
Right. That 40% failure rate, or maybe worse, the percentage who suffer side effects, often comes from treating based on historical averages across large heterogeneous populations. WHDAI aims to end that reliance on averages by monitoring your specific body's unique response to a treatment in real time. Imagine using continuous health monitors, wearables, implants, maybe smart patches, tracking over 100 relevant biomarkers simultaneously after you start a new medication.
What would it track?
Your liver enzyme levels to see how you're metabolizing the drug, specific inflammatory markers to check for adverse reactions, the concentration of drug metabolites in your system, your kidney function, maybe even shifts in your gut microbiome composition in response to the drug, all in real time.
And something is off.
If your body is processing the drug much too quickly, rendering it ineffective at the standard dose, or if it's causing an unexpected inflammatory cascade specific to your immune system, the AI recognizes that causal failure, that deviation from the expected pathway, instantly, not weeks later when you report side effects.
And what specific tools could come out of that capability?
We're looking at things like personalized treatment simulators. Before you even take the first dose of a powerful new drug, like a novel chemotherapy agent, the WHDAI could model precisely how your unique physiological system, based on your current metabolic state, stress levels, diet, genetics, even your current gut microbiome profile, is likely to process and respond to that specific agent.
So it predicts side effects or efficacy before you take the pill.
That's the goal. It could suggest personalized dosage adjustments or maybe complementary interventions, like specific probiotics or dietary changes, designed to mitigate predicted side effects or enhance efficacy before the treatment is even administered. It shifts medical practice from relying on historical probability for populations towards predicting near certainty for the individual in real time.
Okay, finally in this section, the sources bring up genetics without determinism. This feels crucial for overcoming that sense of genetic fatalism some people feel. My genes say I have a high risk for condition X, so it's inevitable.
Exactly. Traditional AI analyzing population-level genetic data often reinforces that probabilistic destiny. People with your genetic markers have an 80% higher risk of developing diabetes. It's based on historical correlation across large groups.
How does WHDAI change that conversation?
It changes the entire focus. It acknowledges that your genes create tendencies, predispositions, potential vulnerabilities, maybe a tendency towards inflammation, or a specific metabolic slowdown pathway. But it focuses intensely on the dynamic, real-time causal relationship between your environment, your lifestyle choices, diet, exercise, stress management, and how those factors are actively influencing gene expression epigenetics.
So it's looking at how my life today is turning my genes on or off.
Precisely. So if you have, say, a known genetic risk for early onset arthritis,
Right.
the WHDAI doesn't just issue a static warning based on your DNA sequence from a test you took years ago. It monitors your real-time inflammatory markers, your metabolic state, maybe even epigenetic markers if the sensing tech gets there. It recognizes how specific dietary choices you made this week, or your current stress levels, or your specific exercise regime are actively increasing or suppressing the expression of those particular arthritis-related genes right now.
And the intervention.
It then suggests hyper-specific, tailored dietary and exercise routines designed to counteract the negative gene expression patterns it's observing in you. Maybe recommending a very specific type of omega-3 supplementation based on your current cellular lipid profile analysis, or a particular form of low-impact exercise targeting specific muscle groups whose weakness is currently contributing to joint stress. And crucially, these recommendations adapt moment by moment or day by day as your biology responds. It helps you actively optimize your genetic potential by focusing on managing the influence of your lifestyle on your genes, not just accepting the predetermination.
Okay, this focus on real-time causality is powerful at the individual level. Now we need to broaden our scope significantly. How does this approach tackle those huge, messy societal discontinuities? Things like politics, economics, the environment domains just riddled with historical complexity, inertia, and systemic bias.
Exactly. These large-scale systems are where historical data is often most misleading because the underlying conditions are constantly shifting in unprecedented ways. Let's start with preventing social instability and conflict.
Right. Traditional political science, AI, or analysis, relies heavily on patterns from the past, doesn't it? It says, historically, when poverty hits X level and communication freedom hits Y level, and there's Z type of political structure, then a revolution becomes likely, based on studying past revolutions.
Yes, it looks for analogies in history, but the problem is every society's path towards instability is unique. It's shaped by its current context, its specific technologies like social media, its evolving cultural norms, its particular set of grievances right now. Historical AI often misses the emergent, novel patterns of stress that don't fit the old models.
So WHDAI looks for unique patterns in the present.
Exactly. It's designed to recognize those unique patterns of social stress in real time by monitoring a massive, complex array of different pattern indicators simultaneously, looking for causal connections between them.
We mentioned communication pattern shifts earlier.
Yeah.
What does that monitoring look like in practice at a societal level?
It would be highly detailed, anonymized, and aggregated, of course, respecting privacy. But it could track the collective emotional valence of public digital communication. Is the overall tone becoming more angry, more fearful? It would track the frequency and spread velocity of specific grievance-related keywords or narratives. And crucially, it would look for a causal link between shifts in these communication patterns and observable real-world actions, like sudden increases in protests, localized unrest, or even shifts in migration patterns.
Okay, analyzing the mood and narratives.
Yeah.
What about those economic stress markers beyond just national GDP or unemployment?
It moves beyond those top-line figures. It would track more granular indicators like unusual debt accumulation rates concentrated in specific geographic areas or demographic sectors. It could monitor sentiment around localized resource depletion anxiety tracking, say online searches and discussions about food scarcity in a region versus the actual food distribution data for that region, looking for mismatches that indicate rising fear. It might also track subtle shifts in discretionary spending patterns that suggest a widespread, collective lack of faith in the future economy, even if GDP looks okay.
And that more abstract but maybe most crucial element, trust erosion indicators. How do you measure trust or its erosion?
This is absolutely key for social cohesion. WHDAI could monitor institutional engagement changes. For instance, a rapid, unexplained drop in people participating in local government meetings, or a sudden decrease in citizens reporting localized crimes to authorities in certain areas.
Why would that indicate trust erosion?
Because it might suggest people feel the system isn't responsive or fair. The WHDAI would try to correlate that drop in engagement with other data streams, perhaps aggregate perceptions of fairness or bias in the judicial system or local governance derived from analyzing public commentary or survey data. It looks for those causal feedback loops where perceived unfairness leads to disengagement, which further erodes collective trust. And finally, as we mentioned before, it measures collective emotional states, tracking aggregate sentiment, anxiety levels, maybe even population-level stress indicators from health data, looking for signs of pre-conflict psychological strain building up.
The application here, the sources mentioned, is a WHDAI governance tool, an early warning system that detects these emerging grievances before they crystallize into organized movements or erupt into conflict. But the huge challenge is, how does it suggest solutions without just imposing a generic solution that worked, or seemed to work, in the 18th century for a different problem?
That's where the power of causality comes in again. Because it's mapping the specific causal linkages that are driving the instability in the specific context, right now, its suggested interventions can be much more targeted and relevant.
Give me an example.
Okay, let's say it identifies that in this particular society, today, the primary driver of rising grievance isn't actually high-level poverty across the board, but rather a specific form of power inequality. Perhaps it's caused by highly localized, non-transparent zoning laws that are disproportionately benefiting developers connected to local officials and disadvantaging long-term residents.
Okay, a very specific cause.
Right. The AI doesn't just see grievance rising and recommend a generic historical solution like increase national welfare payments, because that doesn't address the root cause it identified. Instead, it might recommend a highly specific intervention like mandate increased transparency and public input in the local zoning policy process, because it has causally mapped the specific grievance, feelings of powerlessness and unfairness, directly to that specific point of concentrated, non-transparent decision-making.
That kind of targeted, proactive intervention, it really could prevent immense suffering and instability if implemented wisely. The sources also mentioned a potential future tool, a conflict resolution mediator. How would that work?
This tool would leverage the AI's ability to look beneath the surface arguments and map the underlying needs and values driving conflict between different societal factions.
Yeah.
Say you have two groups deeply polarized over a new environmental regulation. On the surface, their stated positions seem irreconcilable. The mediator uses the WHDAI's causal map of each group's values derived from analyzing their communications and behaviors. It might understand that one side's vocal resistance to the regulation, that's the surface pattern, isn't really about denying climate change, but the causal analysis reviews their underlying primary need is immediate job security and maintaining their community's economic stability, which they perceive the regulation threatens.
Okay, it sees the hidden why.
Exactly. The mediator can then attempt to translate the proposed environmental policy into terms that directly address that core causal need for job security, maybe highlighting transition assistance programs or focusing on new green jobs created by the regulation. By reframing the issue around satisfying both sides' underlying needs and values, rather than just their surface positions, it could potentially facilitate dialogue and help find creative, third-way solutions that satisfy the core purposes of both groups.
Okay, let's shift gears to economics. Traditional finance AI is already incredibly sophisticated, right? It's excellent at detecting historical anomalies like a sudden pattern in stock trading that looks almost exactly like the precursor to the 2008 crash.
Yes, it's very good at pattern matching to the past.
But what about recognizing market manipulation or systemic risk that's forming in a fundamentally novel way? Something that doesn't have a clear historical precedent.
That's where traditional AI often plays catch-up. It detects the manipulation or the crash after the historical pattern is already complete, or nearly complete. The WHDAI-based financial system described aims to be predictive in a different way. It monitors real-time flows of resources, global production patterns, complex supply chain dynamics, and consumption behaviors, recognizing patterns of scarcity or abundance as they are forming, potentially before prices even react significantly.
How does it detect manipulation without history?
Because it's rooted in first principles of resource allocation, network theory, and potentially even game theory, it can detect market manipulation through causal analysis. It looks for specific points in the system where resource flow is being artificially restricted in a way that violates normal efficiency principles, or where critical information seems to be deliberately obscured or delayed, creating an information asymmetry that benefits a few. It identifies the mechanism of manipulation, or rather than waiting for the statistical consequence, like a price spike, that matches a historical pattern.
And its approach to tackling economic inequality sounds equally revolutionary. Instead of relying on backward-looking metrics like the Gini coefficient, which tells you how unequal things were last year,
Right. The Gini coefficient is like an autopsy report for inequality.
WHDAI takes a real-time, dynamic approach.
Exactly. WHDAI aims to be prognostic, not just diagnostic. It's designed to monitor real-time quality of life indicators across all segments of the population. Things like, do people have immediate functional access to clean air and water? How long is the wait time for essential health care in different neighborhoods? What are the levels of chronic stress or access to cognitive load management resources across different income groups?
Why track those things?
Because by monitoring these fundamental drivers of well-being and opportunity in real time, it can identify potential leverage points for intervention before disparities in these areas lead to deeply entrenched multi-generational inequality that becomes much harder and more costly to reverse later. The sources detail 4 specific types of inequality. It focuses on recognizing and targeting dynamically.
Okay, let's quickly detail those 4. The first one is opportunity inequality.
Right. This isn't just about income. It's tracked by analyzing whether individuals have equal functional access to the systems and resources needed for personal and professional advancement. WHDAI tries to detect when systemic barriers, even if they seem neutral on the surface, like transportation infrastructure, causally inhibit certain groups from accessing quality education, specialized job training, or even preventative health care.
Give an example.
It might identify, for instance, that a lack of reliable public transportation routes in a specific low-income neighborhood is causally preventing children from participating in after-school enrichment programs or accessing specialized magnet schools located elsewhere in the city, regardless of their family's income or motivation. The intervention it suggests wouldn't just be financial aid. It might target improving transportation infrastructure as the root cause of the opportunity gap.
Makes sense. Okay, the second type is resource inequality.
This moves beyond just looking at wealth or income disparity. It focuses on monitoring the real-time, equitable distribution of truly essential life resources. Things like access to nutritious food, clean water, reliable energy, and even basic educational materials. It aims to identify supply chain bottlenecks, logistical inefficiencies, or even localized hoarding patterns as they occur, suggesting immediate, context-specific redistribution mechanisms or logistical improvements to prevent suffering or potential instability caused by acute localized shortages. It's about tracking the moment-by-moment flow of critical life-sustaining resources.
Okay, and the third type you mentioned was knowledge inequality.
This is becoming increasingly critical in our information-saturated age. WHDAI could potentially detect situations where critical public health information or vital economic data needed for making informed decisions is being systematically hoarded, deliberately obscured, or perhaps mistranslated or misrepresented, creating a knowledge deficit that limits choice and autonomy for certain populations or individuals.
How would it help?
It could facilitate instant, accurate knowledge dissemination and translation, perhaps through personalized summaries or alerts, helping to ensure all parties involved in a decision, whether it's about personal health or community policy, have access to the same high-fidelity, unbiased information needed to participate effectively.
Okay, the final type, power inequality.
Yeah.
Sounds the most abstract, but maybe the most important. How can an AI possibly monitor something as nebulous as the concentration of power?
It's definitely challenging, but the idea is to monitor the causal influence of decisions and voices within a system. Power inequality is tracked by recognizing when decision-making authority becomes overly concentrated in the hands of a few, or when formal democratic mechanisms like voting or public comment periods consistently fail to give all affected voices relatively equal weight in the final outcome.
How could it detect that?
For example, it might analyze legislative data, lobbying records, and public input data simultaneously. It could detect if a proposed policy change, which is heavily supported perhaps by only a small fraction of the population, but one with significant resource influence, like campaign donations, causally leads to demonstrably negative outcomes predicted by its models for a large, less influential segment of the population whose input was largely ignored.
And the suggestion.
It could then suggest alternative governance structures or mechanisms designed to distribute decision-making authority more equitably, perhaps things like real-time power balance monitors that visualize the influence dynamics for citizens, or enhanced deliberative democracy platforms. The goal is to make power dynamics transparent and accountable.
Okay, one last massive area, environmental resilience. The sources really stress that Earth's climate system is entering truly unprecedented territory. Historical climate data, while valuable, is becoming insufficient to accurately predict future states because the physical systems themselves are undergoing novel transformations. Feedback loops are kicking in.
This is perhaps the ultimate test case for the novel situation gap. Relying only on past climate patterns is like driving by looking only in the rearview mirror, while the road ahead curves sharply and turns into something completely different. The proposed WHDAI climate system is conceptualized to directly address this.
How?
By monitoring all the major interconnected Earth systems, the atmosphere, the oceans, the cryosphere, ice sheets and glaciers, the biosphere in real time, using a vast network of sensors. But its key function isn't just monitoring. It's recognizing emerging, potentially nonlinear feedback loops and identifying critical tipping points through highly complex causal modeling.
And this modeling isn't based on historical trends.
Not primarily. It's based on the fundamental physics and chemistry governing those Earth systems. It's not just extrapolating the historical warming trend line, it's actively modeling the complex phase transitions of, say, the Greenland ice sheet, based on principles of fluid dynamics, thermodynamics, and heat transfer under current and projected future conditions.
So it understands the underlying mechanics of potential collapse.
Exactly. It uses fundamental physics to predict how the system will behave under novel conditions. This allows it to model, for example, the cascading causal effects of Arctic permafrost thaw releasing methane, which causes more whirring, which thaws more permafrost. It could potentially identify the precise point at which that feedback loop becomes self-sustaining and irreversible, the tipping point, and theoretically suggest the most effective, immediate, targeted, potentially unprecedented interventions needed to disrupt that specific causal link before the point of no return is reached.
That's a huge claim. And the more immediate, real-time applications of this environmental WHDAI.
On a more manageable scale, we could see ecosystem health monitors. These wouldn't just count the population of known species, but would detect subtle system-level patterns indicative of biodiversity collapse being driven by specific, measurable environmental stressors, like a particular pollutant or a specific change in water temperature. This allows for intervention before mass extinction becomes inevitable.
And for humans directly.
Crucially, we could see agricultural adaptation systems. These systems wouldn't just recommend planting based on historical climate zones. They would suggest farming practices, crop choices, irrigation techniques, soil composition amendments, planting times tailored specifically for the current and accurately predicted near-future climate conditions in a specific location. They would optimize water usage, nutrient cycling, and resilience based on emerging thermal, chemical, and hydrological constraints, rather than advising farmers to stick to historical growing patterns that are rapidly becoming obsolete and unsustainable.
Okay, we've covered individual, societal, and environmental applications. But the sources suggest WHDAI is also designed to engage with some of the most profound, almost philosophical questions of human existence, specifically that cycle of destruction we talked about earlier and the human search for purpose.
Yes, this brings us back full circle to that destruction-rebuilding paradox. Why do human societies seem to build incredible things only to eventually tear them down or let them decay? History seems to show this relentless cycle. Build, flourish, decay, destroy, rebuild, repeat.
And it's incredibly wasteful.
Immensely wasteful of resources, of human potential, and it causes chronic suffering across generations. Traditional historical analysis just documents this cycle. WHDAI aims to provide tools to potentially break it.
How? What exactly does WHDAI contribute to breaking such an ancient, deeply ingrained pattern?
The idea is it focuses on detecting the subtle systemic precursors to decay and collapse much earlier while there's still time to adapt and change course. It provides sophisticated early warning systems that recognize the specific psychological, social, and economic patterns that reliably lead towards destruction, often long before they become obvious crises.
What kind of precursors? What are those early warning signs it looks for?
The sources suggest monitoring for several crucial precursors. First, resource scarcity, anxiety, not just actual scarcity, but detecting when collective human behavior shifts from generally cooperative and efficient resource sharing towards patterns of localized hoarding, zero-sum competition, and distrust regarding resource availability. That's a classic precursor to conflict.
Okay, fear about resources.
Yeah.
What else?
Second, empathy erosion. This involves monitoring large-scale communication patterns, policy language, and maybe even media narratives for increases in dehumanization, othering, and rhetoric that causally decouples individuals or groups from the well-being of the larger collective. A breakdown in empathy is often a prerequisite for large-scale violence or neglect.
That makes sense. And a third.
Third, short-term thinking dominance. Recognizing when decision-making, particularly in governance or major industries, demonstrably shifts its focus entirely to maximizing immediate gains while systematically ignoring or discounting predictable long-term negative consequences. This might be signaled by things like how future resources or environmental impacts are valued in current financial models or policy cost-benefit analyses. A radical discounting of the future is a recipe for eventual collapse.
So it detects these deep, subtle seeds of societal collapse that might be embedded in our current psychological states and policy choices.
That's the ambition. And it doesn't just warn. It then offers sustainable design principles. It could analyze proposed new technologies or existing institutions or even urban plans to identify potential design flaws that, based on first principles and causal modeling, will inevitably lead to systemic failure, resource depletion, or social friction decades down the line.
And suggest fixes.
And suggest modifications for long-term resilience and sustainability before the system is even built or early in its life cycle. This aims to fundamentally shift the dominant societal paradigm away from that destructive cycle, build, destroy, rebuild, towards a new, adaptive one. Build, adapt, flourish, evolve, sustain, continue. WHDAI could enable the design of systems that are inherently self-healing, self-adapting, and self-updating.
Buildings that adapt to climate change, economies that adjust to resource shifts, technologies that don't create unforeseen ecological disasters.
Exactly. Systems that evolve themselves proactively, rather than requiring destructive revolution or collapse to force a reset.
That's a profoundly different vision of progress. Now let's talk about the other big human question, the human purpose dilemma. It seems like, paradoxically, in a world with more options than ever, finding a sense of genuine purpose is harder for many people.
It's a real challenge. The sources suggest humans face roughly 4 main difficulties here in the modern context. First, purpose mismatch. We end up pursuing goals that get external validation, money, status, credentials, but don't actually bring genuine inner fulfillment or align with our core values.
Doing what looks good versus what feels right. Okay.
Second, purpose obsolescence. Traditional, stable career paths or community roles that used to provide clear purpose for generations often no longer fit the rapidly changing reality of the modern economy and society. What gave Grandpa purpose might not even exist as a job anymore. Third, purpose confusion. Just the sheer overwhelming number of potential paths and lifestyle options can be paralyzing. The paradox of choice makes it hard to commit to any purpose. And fourth, purpose isolation. An individual might find a purpose that feels meaningful to them, but it ends up conflicting with or even actively hindering the well-being of their community or the environment. Their purpose isn't integrated.
So how on earth does WHDAI help an individual navigate this messy, personal search for their authentic path? It's not like purpose can be calculated, can it?
It doesn't claim to calculate your one true purpose. Instead, it moves beyond simple questionnaires or personality tests. It aims to utilize purpose pattern recognition.
What does that mean?
The system would, ideally with full user consent and control, unobtrusively monitor what activities, relationships, types of challenges, and forms of contribution generate genuine objective signs of fulfillment and engagement in that specific individual.
Objective signs, like what's...
It could track biomarkers associated with flow states' deep, effortless concentration. It could monitor physiological indicators of sustained focus versus burnout. It might even correlate specific actions with measurable feelings of contribution or connection, perhaps through analyzing journal entries or communication patterns, again, only with explicit permission. The key is distinguishing between socially prescribed goals, doing what you think you should want, and discovering what activities bring objective, measurable flourishing for you.
So the AI observes your actual state of being, your physiology, your focus, maybe your expressed sentiment during different activities, and learns almost empirically what truly lights you up, specifically.
Precisely. Furthermore, the system could use purpose outcome mapping. It could show you, based on its causal models, the likely real-time consequences and downstream impacts of pursuing different potential purposes you're considering.
How would that work?
It could illustrate how choosing purpose A might affect your long-term health outcomes, your financial stability, and D, your impact on the collective benefit, like your environmental footprint, or your contribution to community well-being. If your current personal purpose involves, say, a career with extremely high resource depletion, the AI could transparently demonstrate the causal impact of that choice on shared environmental goals, allowing you to make a more conscious, informed decision about potential recalibration or mitigation.
Okay, let's ground this. You mentioned a career purpose navigator. Traditional career advice is often static. You have a degree in X, so you should be a Y. How does WHDAI make career guidance dynamic and purpose-aligned?
The navigator wouldn't rely primarily on your past credentials or job titles. It would monitor your individual pattern of deep engagement, skill acquisition, and satisfaction in your current work and living activities. Instead of advising based on that degree you got 5 years ago, it monitors what types of intellectual challenges, problem-solving scenarios, or collaborative interactions generate those objective flow states and sustain satisfaction for you today.
So it sees what you're actually good at and enjoy now.
Yes, and it might recognize emerging strengths or aptitudes you weren't even aware you possessed, perhaps a knack for cross-domain pattern translation, or a talent for mediating specific types of conflict revealed by your activities. It would then suggest potential career paths, projects, or skill development opportunities that align with those unique, evolving talents and values, rather than just trying to fit you into a pre-existing, static job category description. It becomes a tool for the continuous evolution of your purpose and skills, helping you remain engaged, fulfilled, and relevant as the economy inevitably changes around you.
Okay, this all sounds incredibly promising, almost utopian in some ways. But we absolutely have to ground this discussion in reality. For WHDI to ever be truly adopted and trusted, we need to look critically at its reliability, the huge challenges it faces, and the mechanisms needed to integrate it into society safely and ethically.
Absolutely, that's crucial. While the promise is immense, the potential pitfalls are equally significant if not handled carefully.
So let's quickly recap the strengths we've discussed. No inherent historical bias, which is huge. Radical adaptability to new situations. Deep causal understanding, the why, not just the what. And extreme personalization based on real-time data. Powerful combination.
Agreed.
Now for the hard questions. The first challenge seems like the most fundamental, almost a philosophical paradox. The cold start problem. If WHDAI must ignore historical data to avoid its biases, where does its initial knowledge base even come from? How does it start thinking without any data?
It's a classic bootstrapping problem. If you try to build a predictive model with literally zero data, it obviously fails. The solution proposed in the sources, as we touched upon, is the explicit encoding of those universal physical, biological, and logical laws as its foundational knowledge.
So it doesn't start blank. It starts with the rulebook.
Exactly. We are not feeding it a massive large language model pre-trained on the entire messy history of the internet. We are feeding it the axioms of how reality as we understand it functions.
Can you give us just a few more specific examples? Beyond thermodynamics and gravity, what kind of fundamental laws would be encoded to give it that starting point?
Certainly, we'd encode foundational principles like the mathematical basis of network theory, how decentralized systems connect and interact. We'd encode core principles of chemistry, like atomic bonding rules and reaction kinetics. We might encode foundational psychology, such as the principles of cognitive load, memory formation, basic emotional signaling patterns across species, maybe even fundamental principles of game theory regarding cooperation and competition.
So it doesn't need to observe apples falling 1,000,000 times to understand gravity.
No. The law of gravity is simply an encoded truth, an axiom that it uses for deduction from day one. This allows it to begin causal reasoning immediately, which fundamentally differentiates it from systems built purely on statistical induction from observed data. It starts with rules, not just examples.
Okay, that addresses the starting point. But the second challenge seems perhaps the most vexing for building human trust. Validation difficulty. If WHDAI makes predictions about unprecedented events, things that have literally never happened before, how do we possibly know if its predictions are correct? There's no historical data to check them against.
This is a critical hurdle. We can't just blindly trust predictions about the unknown. The validation framework described relies heavily on two things: the internal coherence of its reasoning and rigorous simulation testing in controlled environments where possible.
What does internal coherence mean here?
The AI must be able to transparently demonstrate that its causal model, which it built deductively from first principles and real-time data, remains logically consistent. It needs to show its work step by step, and where feasible, it needs to successfully predict outcomes in small-scale, contained, testable environments before we trust its predictions about large-scale, complex systems.
But how do you do a small-scale test for a prediction about, say, a global climate tipping point, or a completely novel form of social unrest. You can't just run an experiment.
You can't. So for those large-scale, high-stakes predictions, you have to rely on gradual implementation and continuous internal verification, combined with extreme transparency. WHDAI wouldn't likely give absolute deterministic predictions in such cases. It would provide probabilistic predictions based on its causal models, and critically, it must explain the entire causal chain leading to that prediction.
So it says, here's why I think this might happen.
Exactly. It would articulate. Based on our causal model, derived from principles A, B, C, and the real-time observation of factor X just reaching threshold Y, we estimate a 70% probability that consequence Z will occur within this time frame, because X reaching Y triggers causal pathway P. We then validate the prediction not by waiting for Z, but by immediately monitoring the environment to see if pathway P is indeed being activated as predicted in real time. If the intermediate steps fail to materialize, the AI instantly updates its confidence level downwards and refines its causal map, showing all of this transparently to human overseers. It's learning and validating on the fly.
Okay, constant checking and transparency. Now, the third critical challenge, which ties back to that purpose dilemma we discussed, the purpose problem. Who gets to define what counts as good outcomes? WHDAI might be brilliant at finding causal paths, but paths to where? Who sets the destination?
This is fundamental. The AI can optimize for efficiency, for achieving a defined goal, but it cannot and should not define ultimate human flourishing or ethical rightness itself. The solution outlined in the sources is necessarily one of collaborative human-AI goal definition. And crucially, this process must itself be adaptive, capable of evolving as human values and understanding evolve.
So humans set the ultimate goals.
Yes. Human ethical frameworks derived through democratic and deliberative processes must define the ultimate goal structure, things like promoting well-being, ensuring sustainability, reducing suffering, upholding justice. The AI then works within that human-defined ethical boundary, suggesting the most effective causal path to achieve those goals, and perhaps highlighting potential conflicts or trade-offs between different stated goals based on its causal analysis. It's conceived as a dynamic contract where humans maintain directional control over the ethical compass guiding the AI's optimization.
Okay, so to make all this work, to build that essential trust, the sources identify 4 key mechanisms that need to be built into WHDAI systems from the ground up. What are they?
Right, these are like the safety guardrails. First, transparency. As we discussed, WHDAI must be able to explain its pattern recognition, its causal chains, and its predictions in human understandable terms. It can't be a black box. It needs to articulate. I predict the market might crash next quarter because this specific causal pathway between factor X, resource depletion, and factor Y, speculative investment behavior, has just been observed, reaching a critical threshold, which historically, or based on simulation, leads to outcome Z.
Makes sense. Explainability is key.
Second, human in the loop. For critical decisions, especially those concerning major policy changes, resource allocation, or anything impacting human life and liberty, there must always be meaningful human oversight, confirmation, and the ability to intervene. The AI suggests, advises, warns, but humans ultimately decide, especially in high-stakes domains. Third, reversibility, or at least mitigability. Wherever possible, any suggestions or automated actions taken by WHDAI must be designed so they can be overridden, paused, or rolled back if unexpected negative consequences start to emerge. We need an off switch, or at least a course correction mechanism. And fourth, continuous validation. As we discussed with the prediction problem, WHDAI's performance, its predictions, and its causal models must be constantly tested against unfolding reality, with its probabilistic confidence levels updated transparently based on its real-world accuracy. It needs to be perpetually learning and improving its calibration.
Okay, transparency, human oversight, reversibility, and continuous validation. That sounds like an AI that is fundamentally built to augment human decision-making, not to dominate it. Which brings us naturally to what the sources suggest is the optimal approach overall. Not replacing old AI, but creating a hybrid system.
That's absolutely the consensus in the materials we reviewed. WHDAI is not conceived, at least not in the foreseeable future, as a wholesale replacement for traditional historical data-based AI. Why? Because historical AI is actually incredibly reliable and remarkably efficient for stable, well-documented domains where past patterns do reliably continue into the future. Think about predicting weather patterns in a stable climate or identifying known types of fraudulent transactions.
So don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Exactly. The optimal approach is seen as a hybrid system, one that intelligently blends the statistical efficiency and pattern matching power of historical AI with the causal insight and adaptability of WHDAI.
How would that work in practice? What are the roles?
Historical AI provides the baseline context. It identifies known patterns, flags situations that match historical precedents, and suggests proven solutions from the past where applicable. WHDAI acts as the critical overlay. It steps in to handle the unprecedented situations where history offers no guide. It serves as the anomaly detector, flagging when historical patterns might no longer apply due to changing underlying conditions. And it acts as the causal pathfinder, digging deeper to understand the why behind novel events and suggesting interventions based on mechanism, not just analogy.
Can you give the medical diagnosis example again, but illustrating the hybrid approach?
Sure. A patient presents with a complex set of symptoms. The historical AI component analyzes the symptoms against its vast database of past cases and says, these symptoms statistically match disease X with 85% confidence. Disease X historically responds well to treatment Y. Standard pattern matching.
Okay, then WHDAI comes in.
Then the WHDAI component analyzes the patient's real-time biological data, maybe genomics, proteomics, metabolic state from sensors. It detects subtle anomalies, patterns that don't quite fit the classic profile of disease X it reports. Warning: while symptoms resemble disease X, this patient's current biological patterns suggest a unique underlying disease mechanism involving pathway P. This mechanism is known to causally block the traditional cellular uptake pathway for drug Y. Treatment Y may therefore be ineffective or even harmful in this specific case.
So the two systems might conflict.
They might initially present conflicting information. The hybrid system then synthesizes both inputs. It uses the historical AI's pattern recognition as a starting point. Okay, it looks like X, but gives significant weight to the WHDAI's real-time causal anomaly detection. The final recommendation might be high likelihood of a variant of disease X. Standard treatment Y is contraindicated due to detected mechanism P. Recommend initiating modified treatment Z, which targets pathway P directly, while continuously monitoring biomarkers Q and R in real time via WHDAI. It's a synergy of historical knowledge and real-time causal insight.
That makes a lot of sense, leveraging the strengths of both approaches. Okay, let's close out this deep dive by looking ahead. What does the developmental roadmap for this kind of transformative technology look like? And importantly, for many listening, what kind of new careers might it generate? What should we, as learners and professionals, expect to see in the more immediate future?
The sources sketch out a potential developmental trajectory broken down into 3 rough phases, focusing on the types of applications we might see emerge. In the immediate term, say the next 1 to 5 years, the focus is likely to be heavily on personalization and real-time monitoring tools at the individual level.
Like those personal health tools we spent time on earlier.
Exactly. Things like the WHDAI personal health monitor becoming more sophisticated, perhaps a consumer wearable or integrated home system that continuously tracks, say, 50-plus key biomarkers. It learns your specific physiological baseline, your normal, and can detect subtle deviations indicative of emerging issues weeks or even months before traditional symptoms might appear.
What else in this near term?
We also expect to see more widespread use of those learning companion apps that adjust curricula moment by moment based on your measured cognitive state and learning style. And early versions of the Relationship Health app may be using voice analysis and interaction pattern tracking with consent to suggest proactive maintenance actions or de-escalation techniques before minor frictions accumulate into major relationship damage. This initial phase is really characterized by personal augmentation tools that help individuals understand and manage themselves better. We might also see early financial navigators using WHDAI to offer personalized spending-saving advice based on real-time behavior and causal models of financial well-being, and basic environmental impact trackers giving real-time causal feedback on personal consumption choices.
Okay, that feels tangible. Moving into the medium term, maybe 5-15 years out, the sources suggest we start seeing integration at the community and potentially governmental levels.
Yes, this is where we move beyond purely individual tools and start seeing the integration of these systems into broader societal functions. For instance, the WHDAI smart home system could evolve beyond just convenience. It might coordinate data from personal health monitors, environmental sensors, and energy grids to create truly optimal living environments, dynamically adjusting temperature, air quality, lighting, and even soundscapes based on causal models of occupants' health, well-being, and cognitive performance needs.
And at the community level.
Crucially, this phase could see the emergence of community health platforms. These would use aggregated, anonymized WHDAI data from willing participants to detect subtle disease clusters, identify localized environmental health hazards, like poor air quality pockets, or track the spread of infectious diseases in real time with much greater granularity and causal understanding than current systems allow.
And for governance.
Governance could start to be tackled with early versions of the WHDAI governance dashboard. This wouldn't dictate policy, but would provide policymakers and citizens with real-time monitoring of the actual impacts of implemented policies, detecting unintended consequences or disparities as they emerge, making the complex cause and effect relationships of government action much more visible and potentially accountable.
And that medium-term phase also includes the career evolution guide you mentioned, right? Helping people navigate job changes.
It does. As job markets likely become even more fluid due to automation and economic shifts, this guide would become increasingly important. It wouldn't just list job openings. It would actively help workers identify emerging skills needed in the economy in real time, understand their own evolving strengths and purpose patterns, as tracked by WHDAI, and suggest personalized learning pathways or career transitions aligned with both market needs and individual fulfillment.
Okay, now looking further out to the horizon, the long term, perhaps 50 years from now, this is where the truly transformative, maybe even slightly speculative concepts reside in the source material.
Indeed. This phase envisions technologies that could fundamentally alter human experience and global coordination. Concepts mentioned include the WHDAI neural interface, potentially a seamless, non-invasive, direct brain-computer interface designed for deep collaboration with WHDAI systems. It could allow for instantaneous nonverbal exchange of complex causal models, understanding thoughts, emotions, and intentions directly, enabling unprecedented levels of human-AI synergy.
Wow. And on a global scale.
On a global scale, the vision includes a global resource coordination system. This would leverage WHDAI's real-time monitoring and causal modeling capabilities to optimize the worldwide distribution of essential resources like food, water, energy, and critical materials based on real-time needs assessment, predictive modeling of shortages or surpluses, and principles of sustainability and equity, aiming to prevent conflict over resources and minimize exploitative dynamics on a global level.
And those research platforms.
Yeah.
The ones aimed at the really big questions.
Yes. Two stand out. The WHDAI Consciousness Research Platform. This is envisioned as a tool using WHDAI's causal modeling prowess, combined with first principles of psychology, neuroscience, and biology, to systematically study the nature of human consciousness, well-being, and authentic flourishing. The goal would be to identify, objectively, what factors and conditions causally generate genuine, lasting life satisfaction and meaning across diverse human experiences.
And the other one sounded almost science fiction.
The WHDAI Interspecies Communication System. This is perhaps the most ambitious long-term goal mentioned. The idea is to use WHDAI's ability to decode complex patterns based on fundamental biological and behavioral principles to facilitate meaningful understanding and potentially even communication between humans and other intelligent species, dolphins, primates, maybe others, by decoding their non-human communication signals and inferring their emotional states and intentions through causal biological and behavioral pattern analysis.
That's a lot to think about. Finally, though, let's bring it back to the present and near future. We must look at the impact on jobs. Automation anxiety is high. Does the rise of WHDAI eliminate human jobs, or does it change them?
The sources strongly suggest the latter. WHDAI doesn't eliminate the need for human intellect. It fundamentally shifts the kind of intellect that is most valuable. It creates entirely new categories of work centered on interpreting these complex, real-time causal patterns and collaborating with the AI.
So the human element moves away from routine data processing.
Yes, away from managing historical data or performing repetitive analytical tasks and towards higher-level interpretation, ethical guidance, and creative problem-solving in partnership with the AI. We're likely to see the rise of entirely new pattern analysis professions.
Like what?
Things like human pattern interpreters. These would be professionals, perhaps like therapists or coaches, who help individuals understand the complex insights WHDAI generates about their own behavior, biology, or cognitive patterns humans, translating the AI's causal findings into actionable human context and personalized strategies. We'd also need cross-domain pattern specialists, people skilled at identifying crucial high-level causal connections that span seemingly disparate fields, like understanding how shifts in urban design architecture causally affect community mental health metrics, psychology, and public health.
And what about the roles focused specifically on working with the AI, the human-AI collaboration roles?
Those are absolutely essential for ensuring WHDAI develops safely and aligns with human goals. We'll need WHDAI trainers, but not programmers in the traditional sense. These would be people skilled in teaching the AI systems about evolving human values, ethical nuances, and complex social contexts that pure data analysis alone cannot capture. Think of them as ethics and values instructors for AI. We'll also need WHDAI translators. These individuals would bridge the gap between the AI's complex, often mathematical or logical, causal reasoning and human understanding. They would help policymakers, business leaders, and the general public grasp why the AI is making a certain prediction or recommendation, translating the intricate flowcharts of physics, biology, and logic into accessible narratives and actionable insights.
And overseeing the ethics.
Absolutely critical. We'd need dedicated WHDAI ethics coordinators or auditors. Their job is to continuously monitor the AI's development and deployment, ensuring it strictly adheres to the defined human goals of collective flourishing, fairness, and sustainability, and flagging potential biases or unintended negative consequences before they escalate. The jobs fundamentally shift from managing the known past to interpreting and navigating a complex, unique, unfolding real-time reality.
This has been a truly fascinating deep dive. We've journeyed from the limitations of current AI, locked in the past, to the potential of WHDAI, an entirely new cognitive architecture for intelligence. One built for understanding the present and shaping a better future, hopefully breaking free from historical cycles.
That's a great summary. To really boil it down, we were talking about a fundamental shift, moving away from relying solely on the patterns of the past, which inevitably leads to historical bias and failure when truly novel situations arise, and moving towards recognizing and understanding the patterns of the present, using first principles and deep causal understanding of why things are happening.
And the immediate relevance for you, the listener, the learner, is potentially massive. We're talking about the possibility of truly personalized health interventions, relationships guided by deeper understanding, and learning experiences tailored specifically to your unique biological and cognitive state today, right now, not based on averages.
And zooming out, the societal relevance is perhaps the most critical piece. This represents the potential, at least, to acquire tools that could help us proactively prevent systemic structural collapse, mitigate deep-seated inequality before it becomes irreversible, and maybe, just maybe, break those destructive cycles of build and destroy that have tragically plagued human civilization for millennia. It offers a path towards genuine, sustained societal evolution, not just cyclical repetition.
So as you process this monumental shift, this move from historical correlation to real-time causal reality, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over. It's drawn from those ambitious long-term goals outlined in our sources, particularly regarding understanding human consciousness and achieving interspecies communication.
It really pushes the boundaries. If an AI system, like WHDAI is envisioned to be, can genuinely look at the universal, unbiased laws of biology and psychology to help humanity collectively understand and find pathways to genuine purpose and flourishing. And if it could then potentially facilitate meaningful understanding between different species, allowing us, perhaps for the first time, to communicate and comprehend across biological divides without the heavy burden of historical prejudice, anthropocentrism, and cultural bias. This raises a profound question.
What question is that?
What fundamental unifying truths about existence itself might we finally uncover? If we manage to build intelligent systems designed not for optimizing historical patterns of conflict or exploitation, but purely for unburdened causal understanding and the promotion of collective flourishing across life, what does a truly conscious AI focused on that goal begin to look like? And what deep questions might it start asking about the nature of reality, unconstrained by the limitations and errors embedded in purely human history? Something for you to think about as you consider the future of intelligence, both artificial and our own.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
We'll see you soon.
This is DigitView.